Hello everyone, thank you for sticking with us. Thank you also those of you watching online and on demand. I promised when we started this conference that we'd finish, I hope, with a bit of a bang. A lot of interesting and worthy things to say about sustainable finance, important things to say about it, but it also has its pitfalls, and we can learn from those in order to move the industry on. And Desiree Fixler is a very good case in point. So Desiree is chair of VentureESG. Tell us first, Desiree, what that is, and then we're going to explore the fascinating episode of your whistleblowing on DWS.
We're going to start easy. So VentureESG is a nonprofit, and it was set up to provide an ESG framework for the venture capital space, understanding that the frameworks that we have for, listed companies probably isn't fit for purpose for startups. A startup, generally it's going to be probably in the technology space, and rather than focusing on recycling in the office or diligencing the supply chain, you should be focusing on stuff like AI ethics, data privacy, and not to mention, of course, governance. I mean, we've seen the Ubers and the Theranoses and the FTXs blow up. So, of course, culture is very important. So that's that. The organization was set up just to give young companies, young founders, young employees, a framework to help them be more long-term and sustainable.
Okay, thank you. And we've heard throughout the days why that's important and necessary. And we're going to explore the spectrum between product and culture, I think, as we go along. And I think that sounds to me like that's part of your mission at VentureESG. For those who don't know, I mean, most people I think will, but for those who don't know, talk us through what happened at DWS. And we'll explore as we go, and you also get a chance to ask questions. So I'll invite you to raise hands as we go. But Desiree, tell us about this rather sorry tale, and then we'll go on to the useful lessons to learn from it in a while.
Sure. And at some point, I hope there's going to be a book or a movie, maybe even a Netflix series on this. And I can speak about it now, and I have a sense of humor about it because it's been some time, and there's been positive effects from it. But starting off, what it was a case of a colossal corporate governance failure in the name of ESG, right? This was a situation where a company, or I should really say, because a lot of people working at Deutsche Bank and DWS are really good people, right? It wasn't that it was like a people's issue. It was a specific management issue, right, in the C-suite, and there were a couple of bad eggs there. And they sought to take shortcuts, understanding that there was a boom in ESG investing. And so it was a situation where I was new. I just landed my dream job as the Chief Sustainability Officer. The company had almost $1 trillion of assets under management across every asset class, totally global. And I thought, wow, I could really make an impact here. My eyes were open. I knew that Deutsche Bank had been suffering from some culture issues and a lot of regulatory violations, but I was really convinced that management wanted to turn around. So when I got there and I saw the issues, and the issues were the following. It was misrepresenting their overall ESG profile, specifically.
And we'll get into whether that was negligent or deliberate, I think, but carry on.
So specifically, it was one category, ESG assets under management. And the company wanted and had stated in the previous year that the majority of the assets under management were aligned with some sort of ESG strategy. And in the year I was there, they wanted to increase that number. And the number was 459 billion euros of assets under management are aligned with ESG strategies. The problem was, I got there, I'm like, oh, okay, where's the tracking system? Like, how do you track ESG integration? And ESG integration is just, again, that's like risk assessment, risk and opportunity assessment during the investment process. Wow, so how are you guys tracking this? Like, is there a chip in like the PM's heads? Like, are you tech scraping their investment committee memos, valuation models? And the answer was, no, we're not tracking. And I'm like, well, then we can't report out on that number. If we don't have the data behind it, we can't report out on it. Another category, describing the ESG risk assessment framework and actual database. Publicly, it was described as world-class, sophisticated, utilizing artificial intelligence above industry standards. Internally, it was documented and verbally stated by the C-suite as shit, crap, trash it, and I love this one, quote, has high operational risk. We need to replace it.
Do you think, sorry to interrupt you, just the marketing statements that came before that, were they simply a function of over-enthusiastic marketers, or do you think it was malfeasance?
And that's a really important question, because that's kind of almost the difference between civil and criminal.
Right.
Intent. And I think there was intent there,
okay.
in my observation, because my boss was the CEO. So initially, I thought it was local.
Right.
And I just thought, oh, over-exuberant folks, yep. They don't know about the SEC and the Department of Justice, which at that time, we were under a deferred prosecution agreement. So we were on probation by the US. And I just thought, okay, this is a local issue that needs to be fixed. And unfortunately, it wasn't until the end of my stint there that I realized it was actually under the instruction of the CEO. And here's where incentives come in. So bonuses were linked to certain ESG targets. That sounds like a really good thing, right? Companies are supposed to be focused on long-term sustainability. But here, they had very lackluster, unambitious, and rigged targets, annual targets, and that could give the bump on salary. And so there were incentives there to take shortcuts. And unfortunately, what I had seen, it was in fact directed by the management board, not the people, but the management board. And that's why it wasn't a case of me against them. It was actually us against the CEO. We were petitioning to change things. We can do this better. We can do this better.
Desiree, tell me, so you discovered something that's more than negligence in this case, and you've suggested incentives. I think it's important to explore how this issue was dealt with when you started to raise it. Tell us that story.
Initially, there wasn't a reaction, which was really disorienting. So as you can tell from the accent, I'm American. And sometimes we're a little bit overzealous, especially on regulation and, post Great Financial Crisis, at least.
Business not quite done on a handshake.
No.
It's about law.
Absolutely, yep. Absolutely. Well, that's what we saw. After the GFC, people got in real trouble. Companies went down, and there were huge fines. Yep. And, Dodd-Frank and here, MiFID II, all of the regulation, it was a game changer. What you learned, and by the way, I had a front seat in the run-up to this crisis. I was co-heading credit derivatives, structuring marketing at JP Morgan for all of Europe. And, back then, of course, we didn't break the law, but I had a group reporting to me called, it was called repackaging, but internally we called it regulatory arbitrage. Right? And so it was okay to break the spirit of the law, but just don't break the law. Get a legal opinion. That was the biggest lesson, right? Going through the GFC is you don't only not break the law, you don't break the spirit of the law. There's no regulatory arbitrage. That's not what Wall Street does, right? And really, the regulation that came and really changed that mindset. And I felt that the folks I was reporting to in Frankfurt, they just didn't live through that. They had that old school mentality, what I always call the cowboy approach. And so post-crisis, what we learned is, in whatever you're doing, take the conservative approach, and compliance is always there, right? That red pen, and like figurative red pen. And so I was astounded that as I'm saying, I'm raising these red flags, and at JP Morgan, I mean, I worked there post-crisis, if I said like 10% of these things, I mean, the whole alarm bells would have gone off, and it's all hands on deck. Here, there was just no reaction. At first, I thought maybe it's a cultural issue. Like, it's just, like, this is just a different culture, and they need time to process. Maybe that's like the defense mechanism that kicks in your head to almost to rationalize things. But they did initially nothing. And then, of course, I was becoming more aggressive as we're approaching the, reporting on year end, on the annual report, more aggressive and like, just saying we need to fix this. Where there's no way, and I redlined the annual report, we cannot go out with these statements. Oh, okay, and okay, he's waiting for the last juicy bit. Then I was fired.
So, Desiree, I think it's fair to say, rather than engage with what you were raising, they tried to make you shut up and go away.
Yes, and they did that in such in a really brutal fashion. I was fired by post, not in person. So I think HR is supposed to tell you you're fired and like give you some paperwork. Here it didn't happen. I just couldn't get onto the platform. And the CEO hired a lawyer who messaged me to say that we've issued your termination and a letter is in your mailbox in Frankfurt, knowing I was working in New York. So it was very complicated, but I was fired. I was then, they pulled my work permit because, again, I was working most of the time in Frankfurt and part of the time in New York. They pulled my work permit, so I was made homeless. I was thrown out of the country. And then finally, the CEO wrote a rather disparaging internal message about me and sent it out to the entire company.
What did it say in spirit?
I underperformed.
Right.
And I had questionable business ethics.
Right.
And the same day he wrote that, his office sent it to Bloomberg, and Bloomberg published part of it.
Do you think he'd war-game that with his colleagues, his press colleagues and lawyers and so forth?
I have heard, I have verbal confirmation that happened. Right. I don't have documentation on that. I believe that.
Okay.
And so, I mean, my professional life just ended then, and I'm a single mom of 3 kids, and like, I mean, what do you do? And it was so disorienting. And I thought, let me just look for another job. But that Bloomberg message was always in the room. So wherever I interviewed, folks knew me, like, Des, what happened? I mean, you got fired for cause. What was it? I'm like, no, that's not what happened. And I thought it's best not to air dirty laundry. Let's just move on. But I couldn't get that elephant out of the room. And it took a long time, and I did a lot of reading, a lot of Google searches, and then decided, oh, and the other thing that happened is the company kept coming out with more and more insane grandstanding statements about their ESG leading capabilities. And that was the thing. That was the thing, that the straw that broke the camel's back for me, was just to hear more and more grandstanding and rhetoric and what I considered propaganda from this company, knowing as well that this is a hot button topic, right? We know that there is greenwashing, and I felt I'm in a position I can address this. And very importantly, right, and selfishly, I wanted my name, I wanted to clear my name. I wanted my truth. I wanted to take back my narrative. This is my life.
Are you suggesting, Desiree, and of course that's understandable, sounds horrendous, Do you think this episode was, how should we say, idiosyncratic, or that it's likely to be taking place or have taken place in other similar institutions?
I don't think this is going to happen anyplace else. After like their stock price crashed 15%, it's cost them tens of millions. It eviscerated the C-suite, and they still have reputational issues. I don't think we're going to see something this bad someplace else. But yes,
Right.
we still need to address. There is a great deal of greenwashing happening. I think after this DWS story, it's been a cautionary tale. And I think that executives have dialed down the rhetoric and are doing deep internal dives, internal like assessments on whether or not they're delivering on their commitments and pledges.
Right.
So I think this example has served. I think there's a positive outcome here.
And you think so? That so far, that's the market doing its work by penalising problematic behaviour rather than a change in regulatory culture, for example.
Well, both I think has to be done.
Right.
Right. And I think the regulators are on this. So when I made the decision to go public, I went to the Wall Street Journal. And I handed everything over. And I just said, like, you don't have to take my word for it. Here are the documents. And they did their own reporting and then came out with the article. And then 2 days later, the U.S. authorities, 3 agencies, contacted me and asked me if I would be a voluntary witness to their investigation. And I accepted. And then the German authorities also followed suit. So the regulators and the enforcement agencies were really on it. And I felt, and again, like I have no clarity on that these investigations are ongoing. And I don't know what the verdict will be. There's been one guilty verdict leveled at Deutsche Bank for violating their deferred prosecution agreement. Outside of that, everything is ongoing. But I think that the regulators really paid attention here, understanding there's a lot of terminology flying around. There's a lot of reporting. What are the standards? What does all of this mean, right? And again, they're coming at it from the perspective of investor protection and market stability. And market stability, not just in avoiding an asset bubble, but again, these are clear risks that central banks have to get a handle on. And nobody wants unexpected surprises, and we need reliable data.
Especially right now. DWS obviously don't have a right of reply here. What would they say in their defense, just briefly?
They have done, I think that the statement is, they stand by their disclosures, although they admit they might have exaggerated sometimes in marketing. The fact that I'm here means the story is still alive. And aside from whether or not there'll be a guilty verdict on whether or not they crossed regulatory rules or there were crimes, they mishandled this incident. This is definitely a Harvard business case study and like what not to do during a crisis. The fact that 2 years into this, there's still more and more aspects of the story coming out. When an employee whistleblows and raises issues, the company, because again, here in the UK, there are whistleblower, rules and laws. The same thing in the States, not in Germany, by the way. But here there are, in a company, right, the best way to deal with this is to say, we take this very seriously and investigate it. What you don't do is fire the employee, refute everything, and just keep saying, we have done nothing wrong. Right? That is not the best way to handle this.
Well, they seem to have picked the wrong adversary, and you, Desiree, I get the impression. I've got a few more questions, but anyone in the audience like to ask Desiree a question about her time at DWS. I want to come on then to explore in more detail the lessons. So anyone got a question for Desiree? Please put up your hand. You at the back. Please say who you are and where you're from.
Hi,
Thank you.
I'm Adair Bentheim from Bearings. Thank you for sharing. It's a fascinating story. It's probably led to a lot of action in the industry, but I'm sorry for the horrific personal toll it must have taken on you. I'm wondering, when you went in and you saw there were those issues, what solutions do you think, what processes do people need to have in place to tackle potential greenwashing and to make sure that the claims they're making are able to be substantiated? What would you have done differently if you were actually in control of those management decisions?
Thank you. Good question. And what's my next question?
Yeah, it's
Desiree,
a great
please.
question.
Sorry.
Governance,
That's
governance,
excellent, thank you.
governance. So the sustainability office and officer has evolved. It's very much today has evolved into a position of risk management, compliance, alignment on the platform. So today, I believe the best way a company can approach sustainability is to ensure this. Sustainability is embedded everywhere, right? So it's the front office, it's in your control functions, it's in HR, it's in operations, right? And you cannot have a sustainability office being an island unto itself. The sustainability, so every function within the organization, this is a material part of your business, and this is, again, about risk management, as well as opportunity, of course. But this needs to be overseen by compliance, like every other business area, and reporting, disclosures need to go through the CFO office. So it needs to be substantiated, right? Regular way, as every other disclosure goes through, financial disclosures, we need the same rigor and compliance for, if you will, non-financial disclosures for sustainability. And that's the best way to tackle it, to make sure there's expertise and alignment on ambition, on strategy, on principles throughout the firm. And this is overseen by compliance, and this reporting goes through the CFO office. Also, ensure incentives are appropriate, right? No one should be paid extra for regular, for their day job. Just because a company, a financial institution, gets down their scope 1 or 2 emissions does not mean the CEO gets more money. That's what he's supposed to be doing. And by the way, post-COVID, that's what's happened, right? For a financial institution, what we know is that most of your emissions, your emissions profile is in scope 3. Let's hear, rather than self-congratulating yourself, right? What we know is this, we haven't done a good job yet. Right? No one should be paid extra on sustainability, right? It's madness for anybody to consider ESG a vanity project, right? We're on a journey, and it's hard for companies, right? It really is. I understand there are so many different, standard setters and pressure, and it takes a lot of investment. But just be truthful. It's all about quality of disclosure. Just let your stakeholders know where you stand. Don't be smug. This is not an area to grandstand, because again, in certain areas, we're doing better than others, but overall emissions are going up. We're still in a critical state. That's what I would have to say. That there's urgency here. And you need to approach it with humbleness, right? Not with arrogance.
Do you think that evolving regulation already would have forestalled this problem at DWS in terms of disclosures?
That's a good question. Maybe eventually. I think I helped accelerate that. Because there is a catch-all. You're not allowed to misrepresent, missell, or mislead on anything. It doesn't matter if it's crypto, or if it's fixed income derivatives, or in this case, ESG. But I brought it to light because it's so easy to get confused, right? And this is still, right? Remember, for the regulator, right? You've got, the regulator, different parts. And if you're looking at enforcement units, this is all very, this is a very new topic. It's hard to spot. And I hope I've done my bit to help educate the regulators and enforcement units on what to look out for. At the end of the day, ESG sustainability has become a material part of a company's business and reputation. And if they're lying to their stakeholders, right, and if that's material, that is securities fraud.
Yeah. I wanted to explore the incentives issue a bit more. You described essentially internal incentives to misrepresent, financial incentives for the C-suite. And what about external incentives? So there are buckets of ESG investment to be had. They're priced differently. You've almost got something that's at times a little bit like the Sukuk market, where you essentially pay for your belief to some extent in the ESG finance market. To what extent are external incentives in this market also an issue for entities like DWS?
I think, are you talking about like addressing the green, like
Yes.
the green premium?
Yes.
So I think we're going to see, I mean, and I think that's already happening, that, you know, so as we know, there's a lot of conflation in terminology, right? ESG, you know, for some is just about risk assessment, risk and opportunity assessment, right? It's just enhanced due diligence in the investment process. You know, for other folks, this is about impact, right? When they see, you know, a label on a product that says sustainable, or it says ESG, or it says green or climate action, they think this is about positive impact. And so what I think is going to happen is that the market is going to become smarter. And, you know, whether, you know, something has enhanced due diligence, that's what should be. It's expected. And I think someone recently or last year said ESG rest in peace. I think that we're moving.
We did. Emma did.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
But I agree. I think like, especially like how politicized it is in the States, like, you know, like, let's just get a better term, like just like the private equity space did, like it used to be called leveraged buyouts.
Emma meant it basically gone mainstream, which I think is your point.
Yeah.
It was no longer a niche product, it was a global culture in finance.
Yeah. So I think, you know, ESG is gone, and this is just absorbed by regular way investment process. And so I do think that you're going to see that you know, collapse. The premium. Now, impact is something different, right? Impact products, which, you know, there are some products in the public markets, but most of the high developmental impact products in the private markets. And there it's a little bit different, right? There you have different objectives. Addressing like the wider public markets, yep, I do think that, you know, we're going to see alignment with mainstream issuance. But again, price points for impact in the private markets, that's a very different story because there are other objectives.
One thing, a topic that comes up over and over again in this area, of course, is data and the supply of information about use of proceeds, and of course different standards about the use of proceeds. Do you think the evolution of those technologies and that data will prevent instances like DWS anyway, because the end investor will A, be more sophisticated, and B, have access to the real data about the underlying assets?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, look, the one thing that we've done a good job about is awareness, right? This is on everyone's agenda. It's become mainstream. Just talk about scope 1, 2, and 3. That's a good thing. Awareness is there. Like, companies are baselining. They're aspiring to go net zero, and investors are much better informed. So yes, the more data we have, the more knowledge, expertise, the less dislocation in the market, you know, will be seen, and it improves and becomes just at some point mainstream business as usual for part of it.
Any other questions for Desiree? Please raise your hands. I'm interested to explore more, Desiree, this idea that we move from a product silo to a corporate culture. You're describing an extraordinary dissonance between virtuous marketing, incentives for ESG, and what sounds like a fairly rotten corporate culture. Do you think that they need to be one and the same for this problem to go away?
Gosh. Look, I feel at the end of the day, governance is the most important thing. I mean, you know, we've just witnessed, the meltdown, colossal collapse of Credit Suisse, Silicon Valley Bank. That was an interesting one. I think like Silicon Valley Bank had a number of actually like pretty decent ESG ratings. At the end of the day, and by the way, it found itself in a number of Article 9 funds. And so you have to ask yourself, right, are people just ticking the box, or are they really doing, deep, due diligence? Everything comes down to culture and governance. What is that phrase? Isn't there like a phrase like culture eats strategy? Like, wasn't that Peter Drucker? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, something like that. And I really believe that at the end of the day, it's all about, governance. It's about, a management team, leadership, real leadership, that has the confidence to say at times like, look, here's where we're at. We'd like to go net zero. We're not sure how to get there. I have no issue with Vanguard, by the way. Vanguard just pulled out of the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. At least we know where they stand. They represent like a lot of money. And what's very dangerous today is if we give the illusion that we're really tackling climate issues when actually we're not, right? Central banks, regulators, consumers, we all need to know where we stand. We need to have a clear mark to market. And I just think, I think it's all about, we need to get back to, good leadership, secure leadership, owning something, not feeling you always have to, say the party line, grandstand, or be too careful. There are some things in this journey, it's okay. Some companies don't know exactly how they're going to get to net zero, and that's okay. Companies should not feel under pressure to toe this party line and make statements and pledges and commitments that they can't deliver on. So I do think it's really all about culture and management and governance.
I wanted to ask you a question someone put yesterday, actually, and this is away from the DWS case now, and about the politics of ESG in the US. In this country, in Germany, it's pretty mainstream. In the US, there's been a huge change, of course, in the last couple of years with things like the Inflation Reduction Act, which I don't think anyone would have expected 3 years ago, say. But someone asked yesterday whether putting your head above the parapet on ESG in the corporate financial world in the US is still a political risk, because in some states it's still controversial. Where do you feel this issue is in Main Street in the US?
The States, I'm from New York, so like we're in like a little bubble, like the coast, right?
Yeah.
Look, the United States is quite polarized, and this is a polarizing, politicized issue. There's this whole like anti-woke, and there's that Strive fund management company. Again, that's just like, that's other like marketing BS, right? It's just grandstanding on the other side.
Right.
So it is, of course, you have to be careful, but federally, the U.S. government has unleashed incentives, financial incentives of approximately $400 billion. And what's interesting to see is like the red states that like hate ESG are like trying to be some of the biggest beneficiaries of clean technology and clean energy. This isn't going away. So I think what's going to happen is like, and that's another reason why we need to like get over the whole ESG term, and and just talk about long-term risk management. Maybe that's like more palatable. Like futurizing companies, whatever you want to call it, right? But, you know, what is happening in the States, like with passing this legislation, and I believe that, you know, more will come, that the US has leapfrogged. It's not very elegant what's happening, but make no mistake, the US is committed because there are just these very clear financial incentives.
Any final questions? I've got one more question for Desiree, but you, sir, please perhaps say who you are and where you're from, please.
Markus Ingholt, Danish Central Bank. I was wondering, yesterday we had this discussion over single materiality versus double materiality, integration and disclosure. And you say that, well, at least if we are thinking about the single materiality part of this, then it's, I mean, it's already so core to businesses, it's integrated, it's right there in the companies. Do you think that some of this EU disclosure regulation so the EU disclosure regulation focusing on double materiality, is that counterproductive? Because there, I mean, it's a bit about that. There you're separating the risk management from the broader disclosure.
I'll be controversial in this answer. Yeah, I do think it's counterproductive. I think it's well-intentioned. I mean, it's praiseworthy, but totally unrealistic. It's not happening. And I mean, I think it's just a shame. It's going to cost like a lot of money. There are a lot of schemes around it, lots of like, you know, consultants like, you know, sprouting up that are going to make a bomb off this. But the reality is, how are you going to enforce that? What is the measurement, right? And, you know, you've got the ISSB coming out to single materiality. You're hearing, you know, companies, you know, getting a handle on that. And that's so cool. Why not? Why don't we just get that right? And then in years to come, tackle, like I'm all for double materiality. It's just not realistic today. And it's going to be another, like, shit show, like SFDR. I'm sorry to say, but it is. And that's not helpful, really. SFDR, again, well-intentioned. I do believe that aspects of it enabled greenwashing. And so, yeah, I think the EU, they need to listen to companies globally. It's just, there's no way they're going to enforce on it. It's just not going to happen.
Excellent question and excellent answer. Thank you. Any other questions for Desiree? Please, at the back.
Hi, Etienne Gendron, Impact Finance. My question is regarding your experience as a whistleblower. What do you think, what processes should have been in place or governance mechanisms, I don't know, for your whistleblowing internally to be heard and to work, essentially, like to prevent this whole mess that happened afterwards?
I was going to ask exactly the same thing.
Sorry, we're stealing your question.
It's much better that you do than I do. It sounded. Do you think it was actually worth the pain? And then perhaps you go on to say how it could be made easier for people to do the same thing.
So to answer the question to begin with, ethical management, just competent ethical management could have avoided everything. Understanding that there were some good things at the company, right? And I mean, look, you're running a company with thousands of people. At any given time, somebody is probably doing something stupid. It's just the nature of the beast. And you as a CEO in senior management, your role, of course, main role, like you're a visionary, you're leading the strategy of the company, you're also risk managing it. Like what happens when someone does something stupid? And the best way is to just like take it right on and to say like, I want to know everything. I want all the information. And if it's serious, then you do this, which is really straightforward. Hire an independent law firm to come in and conduct an investigation and find out. So it could have been avoided had there been ethical competent management, a CEO there, and a competent board and supervisory board. Unfortunately, there wasn't. And in Germany as well, you don't have whistleblower protection. So it just, like a lame duck regulator, because remember the regulator at that time, I call it like, it was under Hufeld, Wirecard Hufeld, right? So they were embroiled in the Wirecard scandal. They were too busy going after the FT, right? So I didn't feel, right, and I didn't go to the BaFin at that time because I felt they were compromised. So at that time, now there's new leadership, by the way, and I wish them the best of luck. I hope they're changing. That's another example. Right. They need cultural overhaul.
You're talking about BaFin or
the
DWS?
BaFin.
Yes.
Oh, both.
Yeah. Okay.
And I really wish, Branson the best, but who's in charge of BaFin. That would have been helpful to have a competent regulator and just simply a competent, ethical, secure CEO.
But there was no process for you to whistleblow directly to a semi-independent member of the supervisory board or anything like that?
I did.
Okay.
Oh, no, I did.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And
that didn't work.
No.
They mobilized against you.
They did. Karl von Rohr, the president of Deutsche Bank, I wrote to him. He's the chairman of DWS. And I sent a letter. And I made it easy for him. I attached a 5-page dossier. And I had the links to all of the email chains, to the risk reports, to strategy reports, everything. He replied a week later, sorry, this isn't a matter for me. This is an employment matter at DWS. So he felt blowing the whistle on greenwashing, securities fraud, and by the way, also blew the whistle. There were a lot of other compliance issues on their money laundering compliance controls that I had raised my hand on. He didn't feel that was important for the company, that I was, as a sustainability officer, I was just this little person and it was just a little employment matter. No, I did.
Right. US regulators, I think, are incentivized to land a punch if they can, aren't they? Are you expecting them to do so in this case?
I don't know.
Okay.
The only thing I can say is they're on the ball.
Right.
I feel they really want to get and I'd say the FCA here as well.
Right.
They really want to get a handle on things, learn and approaching this with it's a mixture of like integrity and humbleness, right, to learn, to get up to speed very quickly, just like the crypto space. A lot of this is new, and this is like, these are large sums, large swings, and I feel, both agencies are doing a good job to get up to speed, to reach out to the market with consultations, right, and get a dialogue going, to also, end up in a place where regulation is sensible, practical, and this very important word, enforceable.
Of course. Desiree, it's a bit of a side issue, but I'm interested. Do you think the response to you would have been different if you hadn't been a foreigner?
In Germany?
Yes.
Yeah, I do. And had it not been a girl. Yeah. Oh, there's a female angle to this. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, of course.
Yeah.
Sophia, you have a question.
How diverse was the senior team that subjected their decisions on you?
Not very diverse.
Okay.
I think that's another reason why I got fired, because I raised that issue. There was only one woman on the board. Deutsche Bank only had one woman. So we were failing expectations even in Germany. And they kind of have a low bar. So yeah, there's definitely, I believe, they felt, and again, this is not, please note, this is not like, there are a lot of good people. I sometimes feel bad that I bash Deutsche and DWS, because there are a lot of, good people working there. It's just the management is like, and there still are a few like bad apples. And I think that had I been a man, German, right, things would have been very, very different. You have to ask yourself, why is Karl von Rohr still in his seat, right? It's just the most ridiculous thing. I mean, he was part of the decision-making to violate the deferred prosecution agreement that they just signed. The ink was still drying, and they violated it because they felt I was just this little person. They didn't have to report the report from me on the misconduct. That, again, they could just make me go away, crush me. And so, yeah, there's a gender angle to the story.
Well, that is sad. I hope it all comes out in the wash as it's investigated by the appropriate authorities.
Or at least Netflix.
Yes, exactly. I think we need a script writer right away. Having seen from the inside, do you regard hyperbolic marketing about ESG products with suspicion whenever you see it as a result of this?
Of course. You know, I know a lot of our initiatives are well-intended, the COPs, Davos, but gosh, there's just so much BS, and there's, like, people are almost, they're smug about it. How could you be smug when...
Do you think that might be a contrary indicator of malfeasance?
I think it's probably more just being arrogant and out of touch, elitism.
Okay.
I think that's what it is.
Okay.
Just not getting it, right? Like, there's so many folks suffering, and we have so many urgent problems. How could you congratulate yourself because you've issued a green bond, or, right, you're an asset manager and you have, like, you've done, like, you've got $1 trillion under management, but then you do $100 million impact fund. Like, oh, please, right? It's a start, and I'm all for the small issuance, but address it humbly, right? That, this is, a drop in the ocean, to cherry pick, to pat yourself on the back because a very small subset of your operations is doing the right thing is actually misstating, and that's what, like, HSBC got beaten up for here, right? Cherry picking what they advertise. It's all fine, right? It's great. You are financing clean energy, clean technologies, but be honest. Say holistically, we also finance fossil fuels, but we're trying to transition, and look what we're doing here. That's okay, but don't, grandstand and say, look at the little thing we're doing as we're polluting, the rest of the world. So, yeah,
so
I do look at it.
I think caveat emptor remains for investors, asset managers, and so on. Desiree, we'd be very lucky to conclude this event with you. It's been terrific to talk to you about this. Emma, would you like to say a few closing words? But it's been wonderful to hear you. So a round of applause, please, for Desiree. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll keep it very brief because it's been a hopefully very fruitful but long couple of days with lots of content. Thank you so much, Desiree. I also think you summed up the event in a perfect way, and this is a really amazing way to finish it. So thank you for sharing your story. And as you say, I think a key takeaway is that we all need to work together across sectors, across jurisdictions to drive this change. We need to move with humility. We need to work together. Hopefully the past 2 days has supported that and helped that and provided some action that you can take away. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to our speakers. And again, showing that we can work across jurisdictions. We've had many different speakers from various jurisdictions over the past 2 days, which has been really, really fantastic. So thank you to them. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for putting it together. Oh, thank you. Thank you.